but trust me, you don't want that. I'm an estate planning attorney. What I do is very hard to put in pictures, and it's a whole bunch of words, and then you just start to glaze over and you pass it. So instead, today, I'm going to tell you a cautionary tale of the importance of estate planning. So, when I was 15 years old, my grandmother went into the hospital with an aortic aneurysm, and she died 28 hours later. At the time, she was 66 years old, and she was the primary caretaker for my grandfather, who had a rapidly advancing form of Alzheimer's. They had a very poorly executed trust, and when I say poorly executed, that means that it wasn't really valid. I think my grandfather had signed it, but my grandmother had not. And so that left nobody in charge of the finances or in charge of my grandfather. Enter lawyer number one. Somewhere between my grandmother going into the hospital and my grandfather passing away about a year and a half later, my aunt, who had been named the successor trustee because all the kids had gotten together, my dad, my Uncle Farrell, my Aunt Leslie, and my Aunt Roz was the youngest one, had gotten together and decided that since Roz had studied accounting, that she was probably the best option to be the successor trustee. They'd all voted on this. They'd reconstructed the trust in a way under what I'm only certain were very sketchy circumstances. Ethically questionable, I think is the term I would use. So she was in charge. And somewhere between my grandmother going into the hospital and my grandfather passing away, the woman, she had lost her mind. In the midst of her grief and greed, she began this trust administration. Now, a trust administration is what happens after the last person who settled the trust passes away. The trust becomes irrevocable, and it becomes in a state of administration. It has to be administered. You marshal all the trust assets, and then you start distributing them or keeping them in trust or whatever it is that the seller had decided. So she started this trust administration. Enter lawyer number two. She started taking large expenses out of the trust because as trustee, you're allowed to be reimbursed for your expenses. Now, in the spirit of being a good trustee, she decided that the money that my grandparents had given my Uncle Farrell as the down payment to his house was to be considered a loan from my grandparents and not the gift they had intended. So she set about trying to force the sale of his house for reimbursement to the trust because as trustee, her job is to protect the beneficiaries. And she thought that protecting the beneficiaries meant marshaling all the money back into the trust she could possibly get a hold of, including my uncle's house. Enter lawyer number three. Also, at this time, she had gotten wind of a family secret that had been buried way dark back into the bowels of my family, that my dad was adopted. My dad found out that his dad was not his dad in a trust administration.
You do realize this is no longer a secret.
What?
It was a secret. Sorry.
Well, at the time it was.
Tell us that?
No, it was a deep family secret at the time. Everybody knows now.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Enter lawyer number four then. So my aunt, Roz, the successor trustee, remember the crazy one? She and her sister Leslie, the other aunt, under questionable sanity, I think, maybe it's you, they had never gotten along, like ever. They hated each other, I think, from the time that Roz was born. Now, under her authority as trustee, again, remember, she's acting trustee. She has a lot of power. The trustee is a fiduciary, has tons of power. This is the person who controls the finances. This is the person who controls the decisions and all of the stuff. So, under her authority, under the tangible personal property clause, which for lay people is stuff, she decided that she was going to distribute the items that she knew that her sister would want the most to herself, including my grandmother's jewelry. Now, a war ensued over the contents of the house. My aunt was living there for a short period of time. The doors were locked, cops were called. A restraining order was put in place by the successor trustee to my Aunt Leslie, and then my grandfather died. They decided my three questionably sane relatives, my dad, my Uncle Farrell, and my Aunt Leslie, decided that they'd had enough of this nonsense, and they were going to remove the trustee, another power granted to the beneficiaries under the trust document. If your trustee is acting outside of their authority, the beneficiaries can move to remove them because they have breached their fiduciary duties. So, enter lawyer number 5. And they marshaled together and they hired what's known as a private professional fiduciary who's licensed and bonded by the state of California. We need one in our group. To act as trustee. They are basically a professional trustee. They do what I do, but cheaper. So, this new professional fiduciary was brought in under this trust agreement to finish the trust administration. Turns out, after she'd been appointed and the court signed off on everything, that my aunt, the crazy successor trustee, knew her. And there was a conflict there that nobody had bothered to find. So, in the end, my aunt got to keep all the money that she'd stolen out of that trust. Because my dad and his brother and his sister, they didn't want to fight anymore. You know, it had been going on for several years by then, and they were done. They didn't want to fight it anymore. My uncle got to keep his house. My dad, he got to keep his last name. All of the money was kept by the lawyers. Of the $120,000 or so that was left after all of my grandfather's long-term care expenses, there was about $6,000 left to be distributed between these 4 feuding siblings, most of which don't talk to each other anymore. All of this could have been prevented with a proper estate plan. There are many challenges to estate planning, not the least of which is people having to face their own mortality and make decisions that are going to become irrevocable at their death. But there's changing family dynamics. There's substance abuse issues sometimes. There's a special needs child that needs to be taken care of. There's minors. There might be a creditor problem. There might be that spouse that you have in the family that you know is not going to last the next 20 years because somebody's going to get divorced. There's these changing circumstances, you know, and that's when you start an estate plan, that's one of the main challenges is trying to wrap your brain around all of the, not just wrap your brain around it, but being willing to acknowledge it. What did you say was the getting past the BS story to, right, that's exactly what it is. It's getting past the story that you tell yourself about your family being Leave It to Beaver. That's not the case for almost anybody's family. So there are many, many challenges to estate planning, but doing it and doing it correctly can prevent what happened to my family from happening. And it happens so very, very easily. So mine is the cautionary tale today. I could stand here for hours and hours and hours and hours and tell you all the things you need to know about estate planning because I find it very fascinating. And sometimes it's deep and dark and heavy, and sometimes I get some awesome stories. Right now, I have a trust administration going on that's an unutterable nightmare. She had 16 brokerage accounts that we've had to marshal all into this trust. And they all want different paperwork, and the original successor trustee died, and like the day before she did, so it was like this huge drama. And there was these 3 farms, and this woman had given the farms, they'd been in her family for generations, she gave the farms to their farmers, these tenant farmers that had lived there. So sometimes my job is awesome when I get to make these phone calls and call. Those are the great days, you know? And so that's what good, proper estate planning can do for you. So instead of standing here and telling you all the things you need to do I have a timer somewhere? I'm gonna just stop here rattling. Okay. Yes?
Can I just tell a quick cautionary tale to support you?
Please.
Yes, my past me about 10 years, we had an estate planner who got up and explained why she became an estate planner, having to do with her mother passing away intestate and the confusion and the crazy results that happened. And she would tell that story, I don't know, once a month probably when she got up and did her 30-second, as an example of why it's important to an estate plan. Now, we had a carpet cleaner in the group. He was about 50. One day, I got a call from his girlfriend he'd been together with for, 10, 12 years. I've met her many times. They lived together. George is dead. George, the carpet cleaner. He suddenly passed away of a heart attack at the age of 50. He owned this wonderful carpet cleaning business and used it many times. Everybody in the group used it many times. And problem, she was being supported by him, no longer had any means of support. He had a family that he didn't care for, that lived elsewhere, that all of a sudden decided there's some money and something we can grab. So they came out, they took all the equipment, they took over the business, and she was thrown by the wayside on the street, basically penniless, not having listened to, George not having listened to the estate planner explaining what happens when you die without a will. So, that's, it doesn't just go to married couples, it goes to people that care for other people. If you have something that's worth passing along, make sure you plan
No. Okay, so questions. I can tell you all the things you want to know about estate planning, and I'm actually going to I'm in the process of putting together like a little packet kind of information, like what is an estate plan, why you should plan with a trust in the state of California, and several other things. And I'm actually just going to give it to Will to post up on the thing so that you guys can access it and give it to your clients or do whatever you want. Yeah.
I just want to say one comment about trusts. You either make sure that you're giving the money to the state through probate, or you can keep the money in the family where you want it to stay.
Yep, that's exactly. What did everybody learn from my first time? I did this right before we actually officially launched. What was the thing? Does anybody remember? Probate is bad. That's exactly it. That was the only thing I care about anybody learning about it. That's exactly. Probate's the worst. Because all of them at 6 to 9% in administrative fees off the gross estate. In the Santa Cruz area, you can have $1 million house with a $950,000 mortgage on it, and you're going to pay $60,000 to $90,000 in administration fees out of $50,000 in equity. It's insane. Probate's bad. Questions? You had a question.
No, my question was cost differential between having someone go through probate versus just having a trust.
All right, so full disclosure, I charge $16.95 for a single person basic estate plan. That's just all of the basic documents you need to get your stuff in order. And it's $24.95 for a married couple. So it's $16.95 if you're single, $24.95. It goes up from there if you've got complicated asset structure and all that nonsense. And I'm a tax lawyer technically, don't tell anybody that. I have a graduate degree in tax law, and if the state will ever get around to giving my paperwork back, I'll be a certified legal specialist in taxation. And so there's some really complicated stuff that can happen. But just the basics, it's really very, very important. So I charge $16.95. The most I've ever charged, I think, for an estate plan is like $6,000, and that was because it was absurdly complicated. Probate, on the other hand, is huge. 6 to 9% of your gross estate. Keep that in mind. Gross is not net. So it's a giant cost differential. I mean, it's outlandish. Yes?
Do you have any recommendations on how to go about selecting the trustee?
That's a great question. That's a great question. All right, so first of all, if you have ever had a dispute with your kids, like if you know your kids don't really get along that well, or even if they do, but it's been kind of shady, do something else. A professional fiduciary is actually my biggest recommendation, especially with like a brother and a sister, because I tell you what, Susie stole Tommy's ball when they were 5, and it comes out when mom dies. So it becomes a big deal. So because of that, like the worst trust administrations I've had go on are between a brother and a sister who got into squabbles when they were 6. So professional fiduciary is one of the best options, and we need one really bad. In fact, we need many because we have a shortage of them here.
How often do you recommend to review?
You should review your stuff about once a year. So once we put an estate plan together, that doesn't mean you have to come see me. And that's something I really, really want to note. Oh, are we tapping the button? Hey! Yes, exactly. Sometimes it's just a wrench. That's something I do really want to know though. So I'm in the group, I'm your estate planning extraordinaire, and I love working with your clients. But it's a very personal relationship. I know all the family secrets. I know the fact that your wife has a shoe addiction. I know that your husband has a gambling problem. I know all of these things. So it's a very, very personal relationship, and when it's a good relationship, it lasts a lifetime. I'm not a perfect fit for everybody. I have a very ebullient personality. Some people want their lawyer to, I'm not that one. So if you know your client is like that, don't send them to me. I'm happy to have a conversation with them and refer them somewhere, but because it's a very, very personal relationship. So I just want to make sure people notice that. But you want to review it once a year. You're probably coming and do an update every 5 years or so. But when something major happens, when you have a baby, you get divorced, stuff like that, that's when you come do a big update. Otherwise, it's just take a gander, make sure everything still says what you want it to. What's up?
Correct me if I'm wrong, I've always viewed 3 different triggers for somebody that's, growing up in life to when they need to sit down with someone like yourself.
Yes.
Either A, they bought a home, B, they've had children, or C, they have the amount of net assets that would balance out the cost of putting the trust together, maybe $150,000 of net assets or more. What would you say to that and or adjust those?
I think that's not right.
Notions?
So having assets is not the only reason to do an estate plan. If you have children, even if you have nothing else, we put provisions in to protect your kids in your estate plan. You need to have somebody in charge of your kids. Otherwise, if there's nobody around, they go to the state while something else happens. It's awful. And so it's a really big deal. So even if you have no assets, but yes, when you buy a house, because especially in California, as long as your assets exceed $150,000 with no real property, you can pass it through something called an affidavit of small estate. It's a probate bypass that we use in the state. Just because if you've got less than $150,000 in assets and no real property, besides a mobile home, which isn't technically real property, but people think of it that way, you can pass it outside of probate with an affidavit.
So did you just say if they have a mobile home, you can do that outside?
Yes.
Okay.
So
like for elderly, I'm thinking older.
Yes, it's a cool little hole in the probate code because most of the state of California, mobile homes aren't worth very much, and they're not worth probating.
Right.
In Appalachia, you can buy one for $400,000. It's insane. But so it's above that $150,000 exclusion, but still, according to the probate code, you can pass it without a proper probate. Yeah, so it's actually pretty cool. Yes.
And you do as part of the estate plan, you do the, I forget what they call it, the medical thing.
Yes.
Yeah, 'cause that, I mean.
Yep. So
if you weren't doing anything else.
right.
That would
Does
be-
anybody remember Terry Shadwell? Right? It was a really big deal. Yeah, so the estate plan includes the trust, your pour over wills. So a pour over will is just a catch-all document. Chances are, probably, if you keep in contact with your estate planning attorney, chances are it will never be used. But it's a catch-all document to pour over the assets into your trust if they happen to not be entitled in the name of your trust and exceed those amounts I just told you about. It also includes a healthcare directive and a HIPAA release, a power of attorney, your certificate of trust, a general assignment, and a happy little binder. Plus, it includes the quitclaim deed to your primary residence. The deed's extra because of the SB2 fees cost more, but I do include the quitclaim deed on the first one. And so the idea of that basic estate plan I was telling you about is all the things you need to be covered. The power of attorney, the healthcare directive, and the HIPAA release, those 3 things act together to allow you to bypass a conservatorship if that's an issue. If you become incapacitated and you have nothing in place, your spouse has rights, but if you're not married, who's going to take care of you? You have to go through a conservatorship proceeding. What's
So how old should you be before you consider trust?
Oh, at the age is that?
18, right?
Yeah, well, yes, so 18, but right.
18.
But even if, right, so if, of legal age, right, so there's not like all right, I've gotten to 30, now I should be an adult. Yeah, so you're right, it's 18. It's
Well,
as soon as you're able to legally contract.
So if an 18-year-old turns 18 and goes into the hospital, their parents can't take care of them at that
Right.
point, right? They can't visit them, they don't have any rights?
Well, they can visit.
Yeah, but.
You're right, they have
They
no
can't
ability
make
to
any
control, they have no,
decisions.
yes, exactly, they can't make decisions. So when you come to my office,
So at age 18?
at age 18, right. So when you come to my office, the 3 basic things that you need to know are what you have, who you want to control it in the event that you cannot, and where you want it to go when you pass away. Now, underneath that are all the nuanced things I told you about, the family dynamics and the drama and the substance abuse and special needs and all those things.
Interesting stuff.
Yes, the interesting stuff, right? That's exactly. But yeah, so that's the basics of it. So if you got nothing else for me today, estate planning is very important, and what else? All right, miss you.